Yet when the mountains break and the fires fade, one ember shall wander where shadows still remember. So runs a fragment of a prophecy, half forgotten even by the wise. Greetings, my friends. I am Professor Aldrich, and tonight we journey into the twilight of the First Age, when the fate of Beleriand trembled beneath war, ruin, and ancient secrets buried deep beneath stone. Draw closer to the fire, listen well, and let us step together into the last days of a fading world. The year had come at last when the long grief of the Noldor neared its ending. Across the bitter seas, beyond the bent horizon of Middle-earth, the powers of the West had moved at last. Their judgment, delayed through centuries of sorrow and bloodshed, had awakened. Great hosts gathered beneath the banners of Eönwë, herald of the Elder King, and their shining armies crossed the sea into the lands that Morgoth had poisoned since the Elder days. Word of their coming spread faster than the wind. In hidden valleys, in ruined halls, and among the weary remnants of elves and men, hope stirred cautiously, like a forgotten ember finding breath after a long winter. Calion stood upon a ridge above the river Sirion and watched the eastern sky pale beneath the dawn. He was young by the measure of the Eldar, though the years of exile had touched him nonetheless. The silver clasp at his cloak bore the device of the House of Fingolfin, tarnished by weather and war. Below him stretched a camp unlike any he had ever seen. Elves of many kindreds moved among white pavilions, while men from the three houses sharpened weapons beside their fires. Far beyond them, ranks of warriors from Aman gleamed in the first sunlight, and their armor shone so brightly that Calion found it difficult to look directly upon them. A cold wind came down from the north, carrying with it the faint smell of ash. Calion knew that scent well. It drifted from the Iron Mountains, from the black realm where Morgoth still sat behind walls of stone and iron. Even here, many leagues away, the dark enemy seemed to stain the air itself. He rested one hand upon the hilt of his sword and listened to the distant sounds of the camp awakening. Somewhere a horn sounded. Somewhere else, a smith struck steel upon steel. Every sound carried an edge of expectation, as though the world itself waited for the first blow of a battle long foretold. Footsteps approached behind him. Calion turned and saw an old man climbing the slope with deliberate care. His beard was streaked with gray, and a scar crossed one side of his face from brow to jaw. Though age bent his shoulders slightly, his eyes remained keen. This was Baranor, captain among the Edain, and one of the few survivors of battles fought before Calion had even drawn his first sword. The old warrior reached the ridge and stood beside him, gazing northward in silence for a moment before speaking. "The sky is clear today," he said. "A strange thing. I expected thunder." Calion allowed himself a faint smile. "Perhaps the Valor have brought their own storm." Baranor chuckled softly, though the sound carried little joy. "Storms pass. This war must not." His gaze lingered on the northern horizon. "I have buried too many friends beneath these lands." The words settled heavily between them. Calion understood them well. Every elf who remained in Beleriand carried memories of fallen kin. The names stretched across centuries like a river of sorrow. Fingon, Turgon, Finrod, countless others. Victory, if it came, would not restore what had been lost. Before either could speak again, a rider emerged from the camp below. The horse moved swiftly up the slope, its hooves scattering loose stones. The rider wore no helm, and sunlight flashed upon hair bright as molten gold. As he drew near, Calion recognized one of the heralds who served directly beneath Eönwë. The rider dismounted in a single fluid motion and bowed. "Calian of the Noldor?" he asked. His voice was calm, yet urgency hid beneath it. "You are summoned. Come at once." The command allowed no delay. Within minutes, Calian followed the herald through the sprawling camp toward the central pavilion. Warriors moved aside as they passed. Some were elves whose faces seemed untouched by care. Others were grim veterans bearing scars from generations of war. Everywhere he looked, preparations continued. Spears were bundled, horses saddled, banners unfurled. The great offensive against Angband had not yet begun, but the weight of approaching battle hung over every soul like gathering rain clouds. The pavilion of Eönwë stood near the center of the encampment. White silk walls stirred gently in the wind, and guards armed with long spears watched every approach. Calian entered with the herald and found several figures gathered around a large map spread across a wooden table. For a moment, his attention fixed entirely upon the being standing at the far side. Eönwë seemed almost too radiant to behold. Light rested upon him as naturally as sunlight upon water. Yet there was strength there also, immense and restrained, like a sword still sheathed. The Herald of Manwë regarded Calian with clear eyes. "You have served faithfully among the scouts of Sirion," he said. His voice was neither loud nor commanding, yet everyone present listened without effort. "A task has arisen that requires stealth rather than armies." Calian bowed his head. "Command me." Around the table stood several captains, both elf and man, and none interrupted. The silence that followed seemed deliberate, as though the weight of the mission required careful handling. Eönwë rested one hand upon the map. His finger moved toward a cluster of hills west of the Iron Mountains. 3 nights ago, prisoners escaped from a fortress abandoned by Morgoth's servants. Among them was an orc chieftain who sought to bargain for his life. Disgust flickered across the faces of several listeners. Before his death, he revealed knowledge of a hidden storehouse beneath an ancient stronghold. There lies a relic preserved since the early years of the wars. Eönwë paused briefly. A relic associated with the dark fires that once armed Morgoth's greatest captains. A murmur spread through the pavilion. Calian felt a chill despite the warmth of the day. Tales of such things were rarely spoken aloud. Morgoth's power had seeped into many creations during the ancient ages, twisting them into instruments of terror. Most had been destroyed. Some had vanished. None wished to imagine what remnants might survive if hidden long enough. "What manner of relic?" Calian asked carefully. Eönwë's gaze met his. "That remains uncertain. Yet several surviving enemies seek it desperately. That alone is reason enough for concern." The map rustled softly as another figure stepped forward. Unlike the others, he wore no armor. His dark cloak concealed simple garments, and his face appeared young, though his eyes held an age that seemed deeper than memory. Calian immediately understood that this was no elf. Amaya stood before him, one of the lesser spirits who had entered the world before the rising of the sun. "My name is Arminus," the stranger said. "I have followed signs leading toward this relic for many years. If the reports are true, it contains a fragment of a power once entrusted to one of Morgoth's dead servants. If recovered by the enemy's remnants, it may become a banner around which evil gathers after the war." The realization settled heavily upon the company. Everyone present understood what was at stake. The host of Valinor would defeat Morgoth through force of arms. Yet wars did not always end when kings fell. Shadows survived in hidden places. Hatreds endured. A single symbol could inspire centuries of fresh bloodshed. Calian studied the marked location on the map and felt the first stirrings of unease. The fortress lay dangerously close to regions still crawling with Morgoth's servants. Eunwa straightened. "You will not go alone. A small company has been assembled. You must reach the stronghold, determine the truth of this relic, and destroy it if possible." The herald's voice remained calm, but its certainty carried the force of law. "The armies march north soon. Once battle fully joins, these lands will become impossible to cross." Callian nodded slowly. The mission was clear. Somewhere beyond the shadowed hills waited a secret old enough to have survived nearly the entire First Age. Outside the pavilion, the afternoon sun shone brightly over the camp, but the warmth no longer reached Callian's thoughts. He descended the hill toward the gathering places of the scouts, carrying the burden of his new task. Around him, warriors laughed, prepared equipment, and spoke confidently of victory. Yet his eyes kept drifting northward. Far beyond sight, Angband awaited. Beyond it rose the black peaks of Thangorodrim, where Morgoth's power still lingered over the world like a stain upon stone. And somewhere in that darkness, hidden among forgotten ruins, a dying flame waited for hands bold enough to seek it. The company assembled before dawn on the following day. A pale mist drifted across the fields near the river Sirion, turning tents and banners into ghostly shapes that seemed half hidden between worlds. Callian arrived carrying only what he could bear for a long journey: his sword, a bow of yew, a quiver of arrows, and a gray cloak clasped at the shoulder. The camp still slept in many places, though sentries watched from every rise and road. Somewhere in the distance, a trumpet sounded once, low and mournful, as if announcing the passing of an age rather than the beginning of a mission. The first of his companions was Baranor, who had insisted on joining despite his years. The old captain stood beside a saddled horse, checking the straps with practiced hands. Deep lines marked his face, but there was strength in his movements that age had not stolen. When he saw Callian approaching, he grunted approvingly. "Good. I feared youth might tempt you into carrying twice what you need." Callian smiled faintly. "And I feared experience might convince you to bring half a camp." The old man snorted. "Experience teaches the value of traveling light. It also teaches the value of surviving." Two more figures soon emerged from the thinning mist. One was an elf of the Sindar named Maelor, a hunter from the forests near the mouths of Sirion. His dark hair was braided behind his shoulders, and a long knife rested at his belt beside a curved bow. His sharp gray eyes missed little. The other was a woman of the Edain called Ryaneth, a tracker whose skill had become known throughout the surviving settlements of Beleriand. She moved quietly, despite the sword at her hip and the pack on her back. When she joined the group, she merely nodded in greeting, her attention already studying the northern road ahead. The last to arrive was Arminas. Unlike the others, he carried neither shield nor visible weapon. His dark cloak concealed him from casual notice, yet there was something impossible to overlook about him. The morning light seemed strangely clear around his form, and the mist withdrew from his path as though unwilling to touch him. He greeted the company with calm courtesy, and then looked toward the north. For several moments he said nothing. His expression darkened slightly, and Callian wondered what distant things the Maya perceived beyond mortal sight. They departed as the first edge of the sun rose above the eastern hills. Behind them, the vast camp of the host of Valinor gradually vanished beneath distance and morning haze. Ahead lay lands scarred by centuries of war. Once, these regions had held green woods, streams, and thriving settlements. Morgoth's wars had consumed much of that beauty. Fields lay abandoned, burned forests stretched for miles, Broken towers stood upon lonely hillsides where banners had not flown for generations. The company traveled swiftly, speaking little as the road carried them deeper into the wounded heart of Beleriand. By midday, they reached the ruins of an ancient watchtower. Its upper half had collapsed long ago, scattering stone blocks across a slope overgrown with thorn bushes. They paused there briefly to eat and water their horses. While the others rested, Maelor climbed the broken structure and surveyed the surrounding countryside. When he returned, concern shadowed his features. "Tracks," he reported quietly. "Fresh enough to trouble me. Orcs moved through this area within the last 2 days." Baranor cursed beneath his breath. "Scouts?" he asked. Maelor shook his head. "Too few for scouts, too purposeful for wanderers." Arminas knelt beside the crumbling foundation stones. His fingers brushed weathered carvings nearly erased by time. "They seek the same destination we seek," he said. The certainty in his voice drew everyone's attention. "The rumor has spread farther than we feared." Kalian studied the old stones uneasily. "Can orcs truly know where this relic lies?" The Maya stood slowly. "Perhaps not. But someone guides them. Someone who remembers more than ordinary servants of Morgoth should remember." The journey continued into the afternoon. Clouds gathered overhead, darkening the sky and casting long shadows across the land. The road eventually disappeared entirely, forcing the company to navigate through rough hills and narrow valleys. Everywhere they found traces of ancient conflict. Rusted spearheads protruded from the earth. Fragments of armor lay half-buried beneath moss. Once they passed a field where dozens of shattered helmets still rested among the grass, untouched since some forgotten battle. No one lingered there. As evening approached, the terrain grew harsher. Jagged ridges rose ahead, and the air carried an increasingly bitter smell from the north. The company entered a valley where black stones littered the ground like scattered bones. Little vegetation survived there. Even the wind seemed reluctant to linger. Ryaneth rode ahead to examine a series of tracks crossing the valley floor. When she returned, her expression had become grim. "At least 12 riders," she said. "Not orcs this time, something heavier." "What kind of riders?" Kalian asked. She hesitated briefly before answering. "Wargs, large ones." Silence followed her words. Wargs remained among the most feared creatures serving Morgoth. Larger than wolves and crueler by far, they hunted with intelligence and patience. Even a small pack posed serious danger. Baranor rested one hand on his sword. "How far ahead?" Rhiannoth glanced toward the northern ridges. "Half a day, perhaps less." No one needed to say what they all understood. The hunters and the hunted were moving toward the same destination. Night fell beneath thick clouds. The company made camp within a narrow hollow sheltered by stone outcroppings. They dared not light a large fire. Only a small flame flickered between carefully arranged rocks, providing just enough warmth to cook a simple meal. Beyond the camp, darkness stretched across the hills like a living thing. Kalian sat awake after the others had settled, staring into the dim firelight. Sleep felt distant. Every gust of wind seemed to carry whispers from the north. Eventually, Arminas joined him beside the fire. For a time, the Maya remained silent, watching sparks drift upward into the darkness. Then he spoke softly. "You are troubled." Kalian gave a faint laugh. "Should I not be?" "Many would be." The elf poked at the fire with a stick. "I expected danger. I did not expect mysteries. Orcs searching for forgotten relics, warg riders moving through abandoned lands, secrets buried since the Elder Days." He looked toward the darkness beyond the camp. What exactly are we hunting? Arminas considered before answering. A memory, he said at last. One that should have died long ago. The answer provided little comfort. Kalian frowned, but sensed that further questions would gain nothing. The Maya's gaze remained fixed on the northern horizon. There was sorrow in his expression now, ancient and difficult to measure. At length he rose and returned to his blanket without another word. Kalian remained by the fire for some time, listening to the wind move among the stones. Sometime after midnight, a sound awakened him. His eyes opened instantly. Years of war had sharpened his instincts. Around him the camp lay silent. The fire had burned low, leaving only glowing embers. For several moments he heard nothing. Then the sound came again. A distant howl rolled across the hills, long and low, followed by another answering cry far away to the east. Kalian rose quietly and reached for his sword. Across the camp, Maelor was already awake. The Sindarin hunter crouched beside a rock, listening intently. Baranor sat up as well, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. No one spoke. Another howl drifted through the darkness, closer this time, then another. The pack had found their trail. Before dawn could come, shadowy forms began moving upon the ridges overlooking the hollow. Yellow eyes gleamed briefly between the rocks and vanished. More appeared moments later. The hunters were not attacking yet. They were watching. And waiting. The darkness before dawn seemed heavier than ordinary night. Clouds concealed the stars, and the hills around the hollow had become little more than black shapes against a black sky. Kalian stood beside a boulder with his bow in hand, straining to catch movement among the ridges. Every few moments a pair of yellow eyes appeared and vanished again. The creatures were patient. That frightened him more than an immediate attack would have. Wargs rarely hunted without purpose, and these beasts were behaving like soldiers carrying out orders. No one returned to sleep. The company gathered quietly near the dying fire, speaking in low voices while keeping watch on the surrounding heights. Baranor tightened the straps of his armor and glanced toward the ridgeline. "They're testing us," he muttered, "seeing if fear makes us careless." Rhiannon adjusted her grip on a hunting spear and nodded. Or waiting for daylight. The thought hung heavily in the air. None of them doubted that the pack outnumbered them. If daylight brought a coordinated assault, the narrow hollow might become a trap rather than shelter. Arminas remained calm, though his eyes never stopped scanning the darkness. He stood motionless for so long that he seemed part of the stone itself. At last he spoke. "They are not alone." The words immediately drew everyone's attention. "There is another presence among them." Kalian frowned. "An orc, Captain?" The Maya slowly shook his head. "Older than that, stronger." A chill passed through the company. None needed further explanation. Morgoth's servants included horrors far greater than orcs. The eastern horizon gradually lightened. Thin gray bands appeared beneath the clouds, revealing more of the surrounding landscape. As visibility improved, shapes emerged upon the ridges. Wolves the size of small horses paced among the rocks, their dark fur blending with the stone. Kalian counted 6 at first, then 10, then more. Some stood perfectly still, while others moved restlessly back and forth. Their eyes never left the hollow below. The company mounted their horses without delay. Remaining where they were would only invite disaster. They left the camp at a swift pace, climbing out of the hollow through its narrow southern exit. For a short time, the pack merely watched. Then the first howl echoed across the hills. It was answered by another, then another. Within moments, the ridges came alive with movement. Wargs began running parallel to the company, keeping their distance while matching every turn and change of direction. Their strategy became clear almost immediately. They were herding the travelers north. "We cannot let them choose our road," Baranor growled. "They already have," Mela replied. The hunter's words proved true. Several times the company attempted to alter course, only to find more wargs appearing ahead. The beasts never charged recklessly. They simply blocked paths and forced corrections. Kalian felt growing unease. Such coordination required intelligence beyond that of ordinary animals. Someone directed them. Someone remained hidden. The chase continued through much of the morning. Steep terrain prevented the company from riding at full speed. Jagged hills and narrow ravines slowed every movement. The wargs exploited this expertly. Whenever the travelers entered difficult ground, the beasts drew closer. Whenever open land appeared, they withdrew slightly, conserving their strength. The pattern repeated so consistently that it could not be accidental. Near midday, they reached a narrow pass between two rocky heights. The opening offered the shortest route toward their destination. It was also an ideal place for an ambush. The moment Kalian saw it, his stomach tightened. Maelor clearly felt the same concern. "Too perfect," he said quietly. "If I were hunting us, I would wait there." Ryaneth nodded grimly. "Which means they are waiting there." For several moments, no one moved. Wind hissed through cracks in the stone. Loose gravel rolled down the slopes. The pass itself appeared empty, yet the silence felt wrong. Kalian studied the heights above and caught the briefest flicker of movement among the rocks. His hand tightened around his bow. Then a horn sounded. The harsh note shattered the stillness. Figures rose from concealment all along the ridges. Orcs poured from behind rocks and broken ledges, dozens of them. Some carried bows, others brandished spears and axes. Crude banners whipped in the wind above their heads. A rain of arrows immediately followed. "Ride!" Baranor shouted. The company spurred their horses forward. Arrows rattled against stone and armor. One shaft struck Kalian's cloak and tore through the fabric without drawing blood. Another glanced off Baranor's shoulder guard. The narrow pass erupted into chaos. Orcs rushed downhill from both sides, while wargs emerged from hidden gullies behind them. For a few desperate moments, the travelers seemed surrounded. Kalian loosed arrows as rapidly as he could. One orc tumbled from a rock ledge. Another collapsed, clutching its throat. Beside him, Maelor's bow sang with deadly precision. Every arrow found a target, yet more enemies kept appearing. The pass had become a funnel of violence, and their small company risked being overwhelmed. A massive warg lunged from behind a boulder directly into their path. Its jaws snapped shut mere inches from Rhiannith's horse. She reacted instantly, driving her spear downward with all her strength. The weapon struck the beast's shoulder. It howled and fell back, but two more charged forward to replace it. The horses panicked. One nearly lost its footing on loose stone. Kalian felt the entire situation teetering toward disaster. Then Arminas moved. The Maya had remained near the center of the group throughout the attack. Now he stepped from the saddle and raised one hand. No blaze of destructive power erupted from him. No thunder split the sky. Instead, a clear light spread outward like the first rays of dawn. It flowed across the pass, bright but gentle, and touched every stone around them. The effect upon the enemy was immediate. Several wargs recoiled as though struck. Orcs shielded their eyes and stumbled backward. Fear rippled visibly through their ranks. The light carried no violence, yet it revealed something they could not endure. For a brief moment, the shadows clinging to the pass seemed to retreat. "Now!" Arminus called. The company needed no further encouragement. They drove forward through the confusion. Calion cut down an orc who leaped into his path. Baranor's sword flashed beside him, clearing another opening. Rhiannoth and Maelor forced their horses through a narrowing gap between enemy groups. Behind them, howls and screams echoed against the cliffs. At last they burst from the northern end of the pass and raced into open country. The pursuit continued, but the ambush had failed. The orcs fell behind. The wargs lingered only briefly before retreating to regroup. By late afternoon, the company finally gained enough distance to slow their pace. Their horses were exhausted. So were the riders. They stopped beside a stream running through a rocky valley. The water was cold and clear, descending from distant hills untouched by Morgoth's corruption. Everyone drank deeply. Several wounds required attention, though none proved serious. A few arrows had found their marks, leaving cuts and bruises, but fortune had favored them. As Calion cleaned blood from his sword, he noticed that Arminus stood apart from the others. The Maya was staring northward once again. There was no triumph in his face. If anything, his expression had become more troubled. Calion approached him. "We escaped." "For now," Arminus replied. The elf followed his gaze. Ahead, beyond a series of dark ridges, the land gradually rose toward the northern wastes. A faint haze stained the horizon. Somewhere beyond it lay Angband. "What troubles you?" Calion asked. The Maya remained silent for several moments. "During the attack," he finally said, "I felt the mind directing them." A cold sensation settled in Calion's chest. An orc lord? No. Arminus turned toward him, and for the first time since their journey began, genuine concern showed in his eyes. "I fear a Balrog still walks these lands." The words seemed to drain the warmth from the air itself. Calion knew the tales. The ancient demons of fire and shadow had served Morgoth since before the rising of the moon and sun. Most had perished in forgotten wars. Others had vanished into darkness. The thought that one might still survive, hidden amid the chaos of the coming War of Wrath, was almost unbearable. As evening approached, the company resumed their journey. No one spoke much. The distant hills ahead seemed darker now. Every shadow appeared deeper. And somewhere beyond those ridges, unseen eyes were still watching their progress. The land changed as they pushed farther north. Grass became sparse, replaced by stretches of cracked earth and fields of black stone. Streams ran thinner here, and many carried a bitter taste that none wished to drink. Even the wind seemed altered. It came cold from the Iron Mountains and carried traces of ash and sulfur that lingered in the throat. Calion had traveled through many ruined regions of Beleriand, yet these lands felt different. They bore not merely the scars of war, but the lingering touch of Morgoth himself. For 2 days they encountered no enemies. The absence of pursuit should have been reassuring, yet it troubled everyone. Wargs did not simply abandon a hunt. Orcs did not risk an ambush only to disappear without reason. The silence felt deliberate. Baranor voiced the thought while they rode through a barren valley, scattered with broken stones. "They know where we're going," he said. "Why exhaust themselves chasing us if they can meet us there?" No one offered an argument against it. The map provided by Ernwe guided them toward a forgotten region west of the Iron Mountains. Long ago, before the ruin of Beleriand deepened, several fortresses had stood there to guard passes leading south. Most had fallen centuries earlier. Their names survived only in old records and fading songs. The stronghold they sought had once belonged to one of Morgoth's lesser captains during the years after the Dagor Bragolak. It had never been important enough to earn lasting fame. That obscurity was precisely what made it dangerous now. Late on the third evening, they reached the edge of a plateau overlooking a broad stretch of wasteland. The sight that greeted them halted every rider. Far in the distance, beneath a dark sky streaked with smoke, rose the black peaks of Thangorodrim. Though many leagues away, the mountains dominated the northern horizon. Their colossal shapes towered above the world like jagged teeth. Thin plumes of smoke drifted from their slopes. Beneath them, unseen beyond distance and haze, lay Angband itself. For a long moment, no one spoke. Baranor finally exhaled slowly. "I never thought I would see them again." His voice carried no admiration, only memory. Calion understood. Entire generations had fought and died beneath those mountains. Kings had fallen there. Great armies had broken there. Looking upon them stirred ancient wounds in every survivor of the First Age. Even from afar, Thangorodrim seemed less like a place and more like a threat given shape. That night they camped among a cluster of weathered rocks. Sleep came poorly. Sometime after midnight, distant flashes illuminated the northern horizon. White fire blossomed briefly against the clouds and vanished. Moments later came a faint rumble like faraway thunder. "The war has begun," Arminas said quietly. No one questioned him. The host of Valinor had finally reached Angband. The knowledge weighed upon Calion as dawn arrived. While mighty armies battled beneath Thangorodrim, his own company traveled through forgotten wilderness, searching for a relic few even knew existed. Part of him wondered whether their mission truly mattered against the scale of the conflict now unfolding. Yet each time that doubt surfaced, he remembered the determination in Ernwe's voice. Great victories could be weakened by small failures. Morgoth's servants understood that truth as well as any strategist. By midday, they reached their destination. The fortress emerged from the wasteland like the skeleton of some ancient beast. Half buried in stone and dust, its ruined walls stretched across a low hill overlooking a dry ravine. Towers stood broken and roofless. Entire sections had collapsed long ago. Time and neglect had transformed the stronghold into little more than a collection of crumbling ruins. Yet something about it immediately disturbed Calion. The place was too quiet. No birds nested among the stones. No animals moved through the ruins. Even the wind seemed reluctant to linger there. Rhiannoth studied the ground as they approached. Tracks. Everyone dismounted. She crouched beside a patch of disturbed earth near the outer wall. Several moments passed while she examined the marks. Her expression gradually hardened. They arrived before us. "How many?" Baranor asked. "More than 20. A heavy silence followed. Maelor moved towards the wall and inspected the shadows between fallen stones. "Orcs?" Rhiannoth nodded. Not only orcs. Calion felt unease tighten in his chest. Arminas walked slowly toward the ruined gate. His gaze moved across the weathered stones, lingering upon carvings nearly erased by centuries. At length he spoke. "They entered recently." "Can you sense the relic?" Calion asked. The Maya hesitated. "Yes." That single word carried both relief and concern. "It remains here." The company exchanged glances. Whatever their enemies had come seeking, they had not yet found it. The race was still unwon. Weapons were drawn. They entered the fortress carefully. Inside the walls, the decay seemed even greater. Courtyards lay choked with rubble. Cracked pillars leaned at dangerous angles. Ancient chambers opened onto darkness beneath collapsed roofs. Dust covered everything. In places it lay so thick that their footsteps left clear impressions. Yet other tracks existed as well. Fresh tracks. Orc tracks. The trail led toward the central keep. As they advanced deeper into the ruins, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. The air felt stale despite the open sky above. Strange stains marked several walls. Ancient scorch marks blackened stones that should have weathered clean centuries ago. Kalian found himself gripping his sword more tightly with each passing minute. The keep stood near the center of the fortress. Though damaged, much of its lower structure remained intact. A broad staircase descended into darkness beneath the main hall. It was there that the tracks ended. "They went below," Maelor said. Baranor peered down the staircase. "I dislike this already." "Then your instincts remain excellent," Ryaneth replied. Despite the tension, the old captain managed a faint smile. Torches were lit. One by one, they descended. The staircase spiraled deep beneath the ruined keep. Dust thickened with every step. The smell of old stone mixed with something older still, something burned faintly, distantly. After several minutes, the stairs opened into a vast underground chamber. Rows of pillars vanished into darkness beyond the torchlight. Crates and weapon racks stood scattered across the floor, many reduced to rotting fragments. Rusted armor lay where it had fallen centuries ago. The entire vault appeared untouched since the First Age. Yet signs of recent activity were everywhere. Broken crates, fresh footprints, discarded torches. Their enemies had searched this place thoroughly. A sudden sound echoed through the darkness. Metal striking stone. Then silence. The company froze. The noise had come from deeper within the vault. Someone else remained below. Without speaking, they extinguished 2 of the torches and advanced more carefully. Shadows swallowed much of the chamber. The remaining light revealed only fragments of towering pillars and ruined supplies. Every step seemed unnaturally loud. Then they saw movement. Several figures emerged between distant columns. Orcs. At least a dozen. The creatures appeared agitated. Some argued in harsh whispers. Others searched frantically among piles of rubble. Their behavior puzzled Kalian. They looked less like conquerors and more like desperate treasure hunters running out of time. One of them suddenly shouted. The others turned. Not toward the company. Toward something behind them. A terrible scream followed. It lasted only seconds. Then it ended. The orcs scattered in panic. Several dropped their weapons and ran blindly through the darkness. Others threw themselves behind pillars. Raw terror had seized them. "What in the name of the Valor?" Baranor began. Then a new sound rolled across the underground chamber. A deep, resonant footstep. Another followed. The pillars themselves seemed to tremble. Far beyond the fleeing orcs, something moved within the darkness. Something enormous. A dull red glow appeared briefly between the columns. Then another. Like embers opening within a furnace. Arminas's face became pale with certainty. His voice emerged little more than a whisper. "We are too late." The red glow brightened, and from the depths of the forgotten vault, a shape of shadow and fire slowly began to rise. The red glow intensified between the distant pillars, staining the darkness with the color of fresh blood. One by one, the fleeing orcs vanished into the shadows beyond the company's torchlight. Their panic spread through the chamber like a disease. Some stumbled over fallen stones. Others dropped weapons and packs in their desperation to escape. None looked back. Whatever approached from the depths of the vault terrified them far more than any enemy waiting ahead. The sound came again. A single footstep. Stone cracked beneath it. Dust drifted from the ceiling high above. Callion felt the vibration through the soles of his boots. Every instinct urged him to retreat. Tales of Balrogs belonged to the great tragedies of the elder days. They were monsters from songs of ruin and heroism, foes who slew princes and shattered armies. Hearing one approach through the darkness transformed those distant stories into something immediate and horribly real. The creature emerged gradually. At first, Callion saw only a vast shape moving among the pillars. Then fire blossomed along its body. Not bright flames like those of a campfire or forge, but darker fire, burning with shades of crimson and orange beneath rolling smoke. Its height exceeded that of any man. Horns curved upward from a shadowed head. Long arms ended in clawed hands. Every movement carried immense strength. Around it, the air shimmered with heat. Baranor whispered a prayer beneath his breath. Rhiannoth gripped her spear so tightly that her knuckles whitened. Even Maelor's normally steady gaze revealed unease. Only Arminas remained outwardly calm, though sorrow shadowed his features. The Balrog halted among the pillars. For a moment, it simply watched. Its eyes glowed like molten iron within the darkness. Callion sensed intelligence there, cold and ancient. This was no mindless beast. The creature studied them with deliberate interest, as a hunter might regard unexpected rivals entering its territory. Then it laughed. The sound echoed through the vast chamber. It was not loud. That somehow made it worse. The low, harsh amusement carried confidence born of immense age and power. "So," the Balrog said, its voice resembled stone grinding against stone. "The servants of the West arrive at last." The company remained silent. Arminas stepped forward. "You know why we have come." The Balrog's eyes shifted toward him. For the first time, its expression changed. Recognition flickered there. "Amaya." The creature tilted its head slightly. "One of the faithful." Smoke curled from its body as it spoke. "How many ages have passed since we stood beneath the same stars?" "Enough." The answer came from Arminas without hesitation. "Enough to know this ends today." The Balrog laughed again. "Does it?" Its gaze swept across the chamber. "You are far from the armies of Eönwe, far from your shining hosts. Here there are only ruins, darkness, and old memories." Callion felt his heartbeat quicken. The creature was buying time. Whether for reinforcements or some other purpose, he could not tell. Yet something about the Balrog's confidence troubled him. It did not seem concerned by their presence, almost as if it had already achieved its goal. The realization struck him sharply. "The relic," he said. The Balrog's eyes moved toward him. A slow smile spread across its shadowed face. At that moment, Callion knew the answer. The creature had found it. Arminas clearly reached the same conclusion. "Where is it?" the Maya demanded. The Balrog spread one hand. Flames gathered briefly within its palm. Then they faded. Safe. Its smile widened. Safer than it has been for centuries. Before anyone could respond, a new sound erupted from somewhere deeper within the vault. A tremendous crash. Stone shattered. The entire chamber trembled violently. Dust poured from the ceiling. Several pillars groaned beneath the strain. The Balrog turned its head slightly, listening. Its satisfaction became unmistakable. Whatever had happened, it had expected it. "What have you done?" Arminas asked. The creature's answer came softly. "I opened the path." The words chilled Callion more than any threat. Then the Balrog moved. It crossed the distance with terrifying speed. One moment it stood among the pillars. The next it was charging directly toward them. Fire exploded outward. The chamber became chaos. Callion barely avoided a sweeping claw that shattered a stone column behind him. Fragments erupted through the air. Maelor loosed arrows in rapid succession. The shafts struck the Balrog and vanished into flame without visible effect. Baranor and Rhaeneth dove aside as the creature crashed through a cluster of ancient crates, scattering burning debris across the floor. Arminas met the attack head-on. Light burst from him. Not the gentle radiance he had shown during the ambush in the pass, but something far stronger. White brilliance flooded the chamber. For an instant, shadow and fire recoiled before it. The Balrog snarled and raised one arm to shield its eyes. The collision of those opposing powers shook the vault. Pillars cracked. Dust billowed. Ancient stones shifted in their foundations. Callion scrambled behind a fallen block of masonry and struggled to regain his bearings. The air had become suffocatingly hot. Every breath tasted of smoke. Through the swirling haze, he saw Arminas standing against the Balrog, light blazing around him while fire roared from the demon's body. Neither seemed capable of gaining immediate advantage. The struggle looked less like a duel and more like two ancient forces colliding. Then another tremor struck. This one felt different. Stronger. Much stronger. The floor itself lurched beneath their feet. A distant roar echoed through the underground complex. Not the roar of a creature. The roar of collapsing stone. Callion's eyes widened. The Balrog had not lied. Something deeper beneath the fortress had been opened. "Arminas!" he shouted. The Maya heard him. So did the Balrog. A cruel smile touched the creature's face. "You finally understand." Its voice rolled through the chamber despite the violence surrounding them. The relic was never hidden in this vault. The realization spread through the company. The search had been a deception. The fortress itself concealed another secret. Another level. Another chamber. Perhaps another passage entirely. The relic lay below. And the Balrog had already opened the way. Arminas reacted instantly. "Find it." The command cut through the chaos. "We hold the creature here?" No one argued. There was no time. Callion, Maelor, Baranor, and Rhaeneth broke away from the battle and rushed toward the source of the collapse. Behind them, light and fire clashed once more. The resulting shockwave nearly knocked them off their feet. They raced through a maze of pillars and ruined storage rooms. Dust filled the air. Cracks spread across walls and ceilings. The ancient fortress was beginning to fail under the strain. At last they found the source. A massive section of floor had collapsed into darkness. Broken stone surrounded a jagged opening nearly 30 feet across. Deep below, faint red light flickered. Heat rose from the chasm. So did a smell unlike anything Callion had encountered before. Ancient fire. Ancient corruption. The scent of something preserved far beyond its proper age. Baranor peered into the opening. What in all the world is down there? No one answered. A narrow staircase, previously hidden beneath the floor, spiraled into the depths below. Much of it remained intact despite the collapse. The red glow came from somewhere at its base. Rhiannoth looked back toward the distant sounds of battle. The clash between Arminas and the Balrog continued. Stone shook with every impact. They cannot hold it forever. Then we move quickly, Callion said. Without waiting further, he stepped onto the staircase. The others followed. Down they descended. Deeper beneath the forgotten fortress, deeper beneath centuries of dust and ruin. The air grew hotter with every step. The red glow brightened. Eventually, the staircase ended before a vast circular chamber carved directly into the bedrock. The sight awaiting them stole every remaining trace of confidence. In the center of the chamber stood a stone pedestal. Upon it rested a black iron vessel bound with ancient runes. Thin cracks spread across its surface. Through those cracks burned fire. Not ordinary fire. A flame so deep and red that it seemed alive. The chamber walls themselves bore scorch marks surrounding it. As though generations had feared to come too close. Callion immediately understood. This was the relic. Not a weapon. Not a crown. Not a jewel. A prison. And something inside it was trying to escape. Before anyone could move, a voice echoed through the chamber. It came from the shadows beyond the pedestal. A harsh, familiar voice. You are too late. An enormous figure stepped forward. Not the Balrog. Something else. Something armored. Something terrible. A giant orc lord clad in blackened steel. His eyes burned with unnatural fire. And in his gauntleted hand he held a broken seal torn from the side of the iron vessel. The orc lord advanced slowly into the red glow, and the chamber seemed to shrink around him. He was larger than any orc Callion had ever seen, nearly the height of a tall man, with broad shoulders encased in battered black armor. Scars crossed his face like cracks in old stone, and one side of his jaw appeared burned away long ago. Yet it was his eyes that held the attention. They burned with the same crimson light leaking through the fractured vessel upon the pedestal. The sight made Callion's skin crawl. For several moments, neither side moved. The orc lord seemed almost pleased by their silence. You crossed half a dying world to reach this place, he said, and now you stand before the prize with no understanding of what it is. His voice carried none of the snarling stupidity common among his kind. It was harsh but measured, shaped by intelligence and long experience. The Balrog served well. It distracted the Guardians while I completed the task. Baranor stepped forward slightly, sword raised. Then your task ends here. The orc laughed. The sound echoed unpleasantly through the circular chamber. You think so because you still believe victory has already been won. His gaze swept across them. You hear distant battles and imagine Morgoth defeated. You see armies from the west and imagine darkness ending. The smile faded from his face. But shadows survive. They always survive. Callion studied the vessel carefully while the orc spoke. Ancient runes covered its black surface. Most remained intact, but one section had been violently broken. Cracks radiated outward from the damaged seal. The red flame within pulsed slowly, almost like a heartbeat. Each pulse illuminated the chamber with brief flashes of crimson light. The thing inside was growing stronger. Rhiannoth noticed it as well. "He's stalling," she said quietly. The Orc Lord's smile returned. Very observant. Then he raised the broken seal. The fragment of black iron glowed red in his hand. "You know what this contains?" No one answered. The orc's expression hardened. "A remnant." His voice lowered. "A fragment of power preserved from ancient days. Not enough to challenge the Valar. Not enough to save Morgoth." He looked toward the vessel with something resembling reverence. "Enough to endure." The flame pulsed again. This time the chamber trembled. Small stones rolled across the floor. Heat intensified. Caelian felt sweat forming beneath his armor. Whatever prison had once contained the relic was failing. The Orc Lord clearly understood that. He took another step backward. Toward the shadows, toward an exit passage concealed behind the pedestal. The realization struck Caelian instantly. The creature had no intention of staying. He only needed the prison to break. Then he could escape with whatever emerged. "Stop him!" Caelian shouted. The company surged forward. The Orc Lord reacted immediately. With a savage cry, he hurled the broken seal directly at the vessel. The iron fragment struck the cracked surface. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the chamber exploded with red light. A thunderous sound filled the air. The vessel split apart. Cracks spread across its entire surface. Ancient metal shattered. Fragments flew outward in all directions. The imprisoned flame was free. Caelian threw himself aside as a wave of heat swept across the chamber. The force struck like a physical blow. Stone blackened. Dust ignited. Several fallen fragments glowed white-hot almost instantly. At the center of the destruction hovered a sphere of crimson fire. It was no larger than a man's head. Yet its presence filled the chamber. The air itself seemed to distort around it. Every shadow stretched unnaturally toward the floating flame. The Orc Lord laughed triumphantly. Then his triumph ended. The flame moved. Not toward the company. Toward him. The change happened so quickly that no one reacted in time. The sphere shot across the chamber. The Orc Lord staggered backward. For a brief instant, confusion crossed his face. Then the flame entered him. The red fire vanished into his chest. Silence followed. The orc stood motionless. His eyes widened. The broken seal slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the stone floor. No one moved. No one breathed. Then the transformation began. Crimson light erupted from the gaps in his armor. The scars across his face glowed like molten cracks. Smoke poured from his mouth. His body convulsed violently. He tried to scream, but the sound emerged distorted and terrible. The flame had not joined with him. It was consuming him. Baranor stared in disbelief. The fool. The words barely escaped his lips. The Orc Lord fell to one knee. Armor softened and warped beneath impossible heat. Flesh blackened. Yet instead of dying, he continued rising. The thing growing within him twisted his body into something new. Something larger. Something far more dangerous. The chamber shook again. A distant roar echoed from above. The battle between Arminus and the Balrog continued somewhere in the collapsing fortress overhead. Time was running out. Yet the nightmare before them was only beginning. The transformed creature rose slowly to its full height. Its armor split apart. Burning cracks spread across its body. Fire blazed behind its eyes. The shape remained vaguely orc-like, but only vaguely. Ancient power had reshaped it into something monstrous. Smoke curled constantly from its skin. Every movement scattered sparks across the floor. It looked upon them and smiled. The expression contained none of the orc's former personality. Whatever mind had existed before was gone. A new presence stared through those burning eyes. Old, cruel, hungry. The creature opened its mouth. Its voice emerged layered and unnatural. "You carried me to freedom." The words echoed from every corner of the chamber. Calion felt cold despite the oppressive heat. The entity had survived. Not as a weapon. Not as a spirit. As a fragment of some ancient corruption preserved from the depths of Morgoth's dominion. A shard of darkness seeking a living host. The creature stepped forward. Stone melted beneath its feet. Rhiannoth hurled her spear. The weapon struck its chest. Flames erupted around the shaft. An instant later, the spear disintegrated into ash. The creature did not even slow. "Run," Baranor asked grimly. "No," Calion answered. The old captain smiled tightly. "Good." The battle began. Maelor's arrows flashed through the chamber. Each struck true. Each vanished into fire. Rhiannoth drew her sword and attacked from one side, while Baranor pressed from the other. Calion joined them moments later. Steel met burning flesh. The result was discouraging. Their blades wounded it, but only briefly. Each injury sealed almost immediately. The ancient flame repaired the damage faster than they could inflict it. The creature retaliated with terrifying force. One swing of its arm shattered a stone pillar. Another hurled Baranor across the chamber. The old warrior crashed into a wall hard enough to crack stone. "Baranor!" Calion shouted. The captain struggled upright. "Alive!" "Barely." The creature turned toward him. Its burning eyes narrowed. It intended to finish him. Then light flooded the chamber. Pure white light. The brightness cut through the crimson glow like a blade. The creature recoiled. A familiar voice echoed from the staircase above. "Stand away." Arminus had arrived. The Maya descended rapidly into the chamber, his cloak scorched and torn. Behind him came sounds of collapse and distant fury. Smoke clung to his garments. The Balrog still lived. Calion saw it immediately in Arminus's face. The battle above was not over. The Maya moved directly between the company and the burning creature. For the first time since entering the chamber, uncertainty appeared in the monster's expression. Arminus studied it briefly. Then sorrow crossed his features. So this is what remained. The creature hissed. Fire rolled from its body. "You cannot imprison me again." "No." Arminus raised one hand. The light surrounding him intensified. "You have endured too long for that." Behind him, the fortress groaned. Stone cracked. Dust rained from the ceiling. Far above, a roar shook the foundations of the entire ruin. The Balrog was coming. And suddenly Callion understood the terrible truth. They were trapped between two ancient horrors. One descending from above, one rising before them. And the fortress itself was beginning to fall apart around them. The ceiling above groaned like a wounded mountain. Great cracks spread through the ancient stone, branching across the dome of the chamber in jagged lines. Dust poured steadily from the fractures, turning the air into a drifting gray haze that caught the red glow of the imprisoned flame and the white radiance surrounding Arminas. The chamber no longer felt like a hidden vault buried beneath forgotten ruins. It felt like the heart of a collapsing world. Every sound carried the warning of approaching catastrophe. Arminas stood unmoving before the burning creature. The light surrounding him illuminated every worn stone in the chamber and cast long shadows behind the company. Across from him, the possessed host seemed to grow larger with every passing moment. Fire coursed beneath its cracked skin like molten rivers beneath a thin crust of rock. The air around it shimmered violently. Each breath that escaped its mouth emerged as a plume of smoke mixed with sparks. Its eyes burned with an intelligence that belonged to something far older than the orc body it now inhabited. "You should have perished long ago," Arminas said. His voice remained calm, but there was grief in it. The creature tilted its head slightly. "I did perish." Its smile widened. "What stands before you is merely what remained." The words carried a terrible truth. Callion could feel it instinctively. Whatever this thing had once been, it had belonged to the ancient darkness of Morgoth's earliest dominion. Ages ago, it had been broken, diminished, reduced to a fragment, and imprisoned within the vessel beneath the fortress. Yet even a fragment of such corruption had endured through centuries of war, waiting patiently for a chance to return to the world. A thunderous crash echoed from above. The staircase leading into the chamber shuddered violently. Several stone steps collapsed. Then came a sound that froze every heart present. A roar. Deep. Ancient. Filled with fury. The Balrog had entered the upper vault. The creature possessing the orc host heard it as well. Its burning eyes brightened with anticipation. "He comes," it said softly, "faithful to the end." Arminas did not answer. His gaze remained fixed upon the entity before him. Yet Callion noticed the brief tightening of his jaw. The Maya understood the danger better than any of them. If the Balrog reached the chamber before this battle ended, their chances of survival would vanish completely. The possessed creature attacked first. Fire exploded outward from its body as it lunged forward. The movement was astonishingly fast for something so large. Stone cracked beneath its feet. Flames trailed behind it like a cloak of living embers. Arminas met the charge without retreating. White light surged from his outstretched hand. The collision of fire and radiance struck the chamber like a storm. A shockwave rolled outward, knocking loose fragments from the ceiling and sending dust swirling through the air. Callion shielded his eyes against the brightness. When his vision cleared, the two figures were locked in struggle near the center of the chamber. The possessed creature pushed forward with relentless force. Flames roared around its arms and shoulders. Arminas stood firm, surrounded by light that seemed drawn from a source far beyond the physical world. Neither yielded. Neither gained ground. The struggle appeared less like combat and more like two opposing truths attempting to erase one another. "Help him!" Baranor shouted. The company rushed forward. Maelor circled toward the creature's flank. Rhiannoth moved with him, her sword held low and ready. Callion approached from the opposite side. They had learned already that ordinary attacks could not destroy the thing, yet perhaps they could distract it. Perhaps they could create an opening. The opportunity came suddenly. The creature focused entirely upon Arminas. Its attention narrowed. Its defenses weakened. Malor seized the moment. The Sindarin hunter drew one final arrow from his quiver. Unlike the others, this shaft bore a silver head engraved with ancient runes. Callian had never seen it before. Perhaps it had been preserved for years, perhaps decades. Malor whispered something in Sindarin. Then he released. The arrow crossed the chamber in a flash of silver. It struck directly through the creature's left eye. The reaction was immediate. A scream erupted from the possessed host. Not the voice of the orc. Not even the voice of the entity. Both screamed together. Fire burst outward uncontrollably. The creature staggered backward. Flames poured from the ruined eye socket. For the first time since the battle began, genuine pain appeared upon its face. Arminas acted instantly. Light surged forward. The chamber brightened until every shadow vanished. The possessed creature crashed into the far wall. Stone exploded around it. For several precious moments it remained buried beneath falling rubble. Baranor let out a ragged breath. "We hurt it." The old captain sounded almost surprised. But victory remained distant. The rubble began to move. Stone shifted. Fragments rolled aside. The creature emerged once more. Its damaged eye still burned. Its body still smoked. Yet it remained alive. Worse, it appeared enraged beyond reason. The entire chamber shook. A section of the ceiling collapsed near the staircase. Massive stones thundered downward. And through the cloud of dust came another roar. Closer now. Much closer. The Balrog had reached the lower levels. Callian's heart sank. Time had nearly run out. The possessed creature laughed despite its injuries. "You cannot stop both of us." Its voice echoed through the chamber. "One survives." The statement struck Arminas visibly. Not because it was a threat. Because it was true. The Maya looked upward toward the damaged ceiling. For a brief moment his expression changed. Callian saw calculation there. Resolve. A difficult decision forming. Then Arminas turned toward the company. "Listen carefully." His voice cut through the chaos. "If the fortress falls, this chamber will be buried." Baranor frowned. "What are you suggesting?" The Maya looked toward the burning creature. Then toward the staircase. "The relic cannot survive." Understanding spread slowly across their faces. Callian felt it first. Then horror followed. "You mean to bring the fortress down?" "Yes." Silence followed. Even amid the shaking stone and distant roars, the weight of those words settled heavily over them. The fortress was ancient. Massive. The collapse would bury everything beneath it, including anyone trapped inside. Rhiannoth stared at him. "You cannot remain here." Arminas offered a faint smile, one touched by sadness. "Someone must." Before anyone could respond, the Balrog arrived. The staircase exploded. Stone and dust erupted outward. A colossal figure of shadow and fire burst into the chamber. The Balrog landed among the fallen debris with enough force to crack the floor. Flames spread across broken stone. Smoke rolled outward in great waves. Its burning eyes immediately found Arminas. For a moment, all three ancient powers occupied the same chamber. The Balrog. The imprisoned fragment. the Maya. The sight felt unreal, as though some forgotten chapter of the Elder Days had come alive before them. The possessed creature laughed. The Balrog answered with a roar. Then both turned toward Arminas. Calian suddenly understood the true danger. The two horrors recognized one another, not as enemies, as remnants of the same darkness. The chamber trembled violently. More sections of the ceiling collapsed. The fortress was nearing its end. Arminas looked at the company one final time. His gaze rested briefly on each of them. On Baranor, on Rhiannoth, on Maelor, on Calion. Go. The single word carried absolute certainty. No, Calion said immediately. The Maya smiled again. This time there was warmth in it. You were sent to extinguish the flame. He looked toward the burning creature. It is almost done. The Balrog charged. The possessed host surged forward simultaneously. Arminas stepped to meet them. White light erupted around him like the rising of a star. The brilliance filled the chamber. Calian raised an arm to shield his eyes. Behind the light came a tremendous sound. The sound of powers colliding. The sound of stone breaking. The sound of an ancient fortress beginning its final collapse. And with terrible reluctance, knowing there was no other choice, the company turned and ran toward the shattered staircase, while the fate of the extinguished flame was decided behind them. The shattered staircase trembled beneath their feet as they climbed. Every step felt uncertain. Loose stones shifted under their boots, and fresh cracks spread through the ancient masonry with alarming speed. Behind them, deep within the heart of the fortress, a radiance brighter than any natural fire pulsed through the darkness. White light and crimson flame flashed against the walls of the passage in alternating waves, illuminating centuries of dust and decay. The air had become almost unbearable. Heat rolled upward through the stairwell in suffocating gusts, carrying the smell of burning stone and ancient corruption. Calian forced himself onward, though every instinct urged him to look back. The sounds rising from below were unlike anything he had ever heard. Roars echoed through the collapsing chambers. The grinding of breaking stone merged with the crash of falling pillars. Occasionally, a brilliant flash illuminated the entire stairwell, casting sharp shadows across the walls before vanishing again. Each burst of light was followed by a shock wave that rattled the fortress from foundation to summit. It felt less like a battle, and more like the destruction of something that had endured far beyond its rightful age. Ahead of him, Baranor stumbled as part of the staircase gave way beneath his feet. The old warrior caught himself against the wall just before tumbling into the darkness below. Rhiannoth immediately seized his arm and helped him regain his balance. Neither spoke. Their faces were streaked with dust and sweat. Exhaustion weighed upon them all, yet fear drove them forward. The fortress was dying around them, and every moment spent below increased the likelihood that they would share its fate. At last they emerged into the great underground vault above. The vast chamber had become almost unrecognizable. Many of the towering pillars had collapsed. Entire sections of the ceiling had fallen inward, creating mountains of shattered stone across the floor. Dust filled the air so thickly that visibility extended only a short distance in any direction. Through the haze, Calian could see fresh fissures spreading along the walls. Ancient foundations that had endured for centuries were finally surrendering to the violence unleashed beneath them. The company crossed the ruined vault as quickly as conditions allowed. More than once they were forced to detour around newly formed chasms where the floor had split apart. The sounds from below continued relentlessly. Sometimes the chamber flashed with white radiance so bright that it pierced even the thick clouds of dust. Other times, a deep crimson glow rose from the lower levels, like the reflection of some infernal furnace. Neither color dominated, neither yielded. The struggle continued. Then everything changed. A roar unlike any before erupted from the depths of the fortress. The sound rolled upward through every corridor and chamber. It shook the walls. It shook the floor. It shook the very air within their lungs. Kalian halted instinctively and turned despite himself. The roar contained unimaginable fury. Yet beneath that fury lay something else. Pain. For the first time, true pain. The realization struck him immediately. The cry had come from the Balrog. A heartbeat later, a column of white light burst upward through the center of the fortress. Stone exploded skyward. Dust and debris erupted in every direction. The brilliance illuminated the entire ruin, transforming night into day for a brief and terrible moment. Every broken wall, every shattered tower, every fragment of ancient masonry stood revealed beneath that radiance. The company stared in stunned silence. The light seemed to reach beyond the fortress itself, climbing into the heavens like a beacon visible across the northern wastes. Then came the final collapse. The earth convulsed beneath their feet. A deafening roar filled the world. The central keep folded inward, as though crushed by an invisible hand. Towers toppled, walls shattered, vast sections of the fortress disappeared into sinking ground. The hill upon which the ruin stood fractured from summit to base. Kalian barely managed to throw himself clear as a torrent of stone crashed across the courtyard behind him. Dust surged outward in an enormous wave, swallowing everything in its path. For long moments there was only chaos. The company ran blindly through choking clouds of debris. Falling stones hammered the ground around them. Cracks raced across the earth. Several times Kalian lost sight of his companions entirely. The world had become noise and dust and desperate motion. Survival depended upon reaching open ground before the entire fortress collapsed into its own depths. At last, they escaped the outer walls. The company stumbled across the barren hillside and continued until distance finally separated them from the ruin. Only then did they stop. The sight before them was astonishing. The fortress no longer existed. Where ancient walls and towers had stood now lay a vast crater filled with broken stone. Dust billowed upward in enormous gray clouds. Fractured sections of masonry protruded from the rubble, like the bones of some gigantic corpse. Nothing remained intact. The entire stronghold had been consumed by its own destruction. Silence gradually settled across the wasteland. No more roars came from below. No crimson glow stained the darkness. No white radiance shone through the dust. The battle was over. Baranor lowered himself heavily onto a nearby stone. For a long time, the old warrior simply stared at the ruins. The lines in his face seemed deeper than before. At length, he removed his helmet and bowed his head. He knew, he said quietly. No one asked what he meant. They all understood. Arminas had known from the moment he entered the final chamber that he would not leave it. The Maya had chosen his path long before the fortress collapsed. Morning arrived slowly. Gray light spread across the wasteland. The dust clouds gradually thinned, revealing more of the destruction. Far to the north, beyond countless miles of broken land, flashes still flickered around Thangorodrim. The War of Wrath continued. Somewhere beneath those distant mountains, mighty armies fought the final battles of the First Age. Yet here, amid the ruins of a forgotten fortress, another struggle had ended. Kalian walked to the edge of the crater and gazed into its depths. Nothing moved below. The shattered stones rested in complete stillness. He thought of the ancient vessel. He thought of the imprisoned flame. He thought of the countless years during which that fragment of darkness had waited beneath the earth, hidden from the world, yet never truly gone. Now it was buried beneath mountains of rubble, its host destroyed, its prison shattered, its existence ended at last. The extinguished flame would trouble Middle-earth no more. Several days later, as the company journeyed southward, the world itself began to change. Rumors spread among scattered survivors. Angband had fallen, Morgoth had been defeated, Thangorodrim had been broken. The northern lands shook beneath unimaginable destruction as the War of Wrath reached its conclusion. Rivers changed course, hills vanished, entire regions collapsed beneath the sea. The age that had begun beneath the light of the two trees was ending forever. One evening, while camped upon a ridge overlooking the western horizon, Kalian watched the setting sun burn gold across distant clouds. Beyond those clouds lay the sea. Beyond the sea lay Aman. The wind carried the scent of salt and distant rain. For the first time since beginning their mission, he felt the weight upon his heart ease slightly. The darkness had not vanished from the world. He knew that. Shadows would remain wherever fear, hatred, and greed endured. New evils would arise in ages yet unborn. Such things were part of the history of Arda. Yet some victories mattered precisely because they prevented old wounds from opening again. The relic had been destroyed. The fragment of corruption had perished. One surviving ember of Morgoth's ancient power had finally been extinguished. As the last light of day faded beyond the western sea, Kalian looked once more toward the north. The distant horizon glowed faintly beneath the aftermath of the Great War. Then darkness settled across the land, and the flame that had endured through centuries passed forever into silence. The First Age drew its final breath, and the long night of Morgoth came at last to its end.
Привітики. Трошечки поговоримо вживу. Дивіться, в мене залишилась одна думка, яка ніяк не відпускає мене. Ми часто вважаємо, що великі перемоги творять історію, але насправді її напрям дуже часто змінюють маленькі рішення, про які майже ніхто не дізнається. Ми пам'ятаємо імена королів, полководців, героїв, але майже ніколи не думаємо про тих, хто одного разу обрав не звернути зі шляху, не промовчати, просто не пройти повз. А мені здається, що життя влаштоване дивно. Одна там якась коротка мить вибору іноді важить більше, ніж якісь там кроки слави чи влади. І найцікавіше те, що що в самий момент такого вибору людина майже ніколи не знає, наскільки важлива вона стає. Вона просто робить те, що вважає правильним, без оплесків, без свідків, без впевненості в результаті. Можливо, саме тому справжня мудрість часто виглядає набагато скромніше, ніж ми звикли уявити. Вона рідко приходить з фанфарами, частіше вона приходить тихо, як рішення. Там приходить як якесь там рішення зробити ще маленький один крок вперед, коли ніхто там не гарантує успіху, і, мабуть, саме такі кроки залишаються по собі, залишають якийсь найвеликий слід і найдовший. Навіть якщо світ про це навіть ніхто ніколи не дізнається, хто ці кроки зробив. Так що я надіюсь, моя історія донесла для вас правильну думку, яку я вважаю для себе правильною, можливо, вона і для вас, звісно, правильна. Тож не боїмось робити маленькі кроки, які приведуть нас до чогось великого. Дякую всім за увагу. З вами був Алдрік, як завжди.